It's between Canterbury and London. If you go on the train, Rochester is right halfway between Canterbury and London, but you have to be careful to take the train that stops there because most of the trains go through without stopping. But Rochester is just a little town, but it's a neat little town, and the castle is incredible. So go to Rochester Castle when you go to England. Okay, I have a few minutes before we start our medieval drama lecture, and I want to just say a couple of things about the Crusades and about the Normans. First of all, I want to say I mentioned that you can read Othin's story, which is a Viking saga that Carl Lindahl translated for you. And if you want a sort of thumbnail sketch of the Normans, you can read The Life of Gundulf of Rochester, which I translated for you. And someone was just telling me it's difficult reading. I'm sorry. I tend to stick closely to the Latin. No, it is kind of hard to read. Yeah, that's why I want to write an introduction to it before we read it for the church part of it. Now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I wanted to say a couple of things about the Crusades. The Crusades were also breaking out of the boundaries of Europe, and the Crusades were called in 1099, and here you can see this map of the Crusades. The Crusaders went overland, and overland through Germany and through Bulgaria and Constantinople to get to the Holy Land. One group of them did. Another group went into Italy and launched their voyages from the Norman kingdom of Sicily over here. And most of the Normans who went on the crusade were from Italy and Sicily. And they were just far more adventurous. Eventually they conquered the Holy Land, parts of the Holy Land they conquered. The kingdom of Jerusalem is here. The county of Tripoli is here. County of Antioch is here, and the county of Edessa is here. And it's organized just like a feudal kingdom, with the kingdom of Jerusalem is the main lord, and the counties are dependencies of the king of Jerusalem. The counts are vassals of the king of Jerusalem. And so that's an important thing to sort of mark. Also, one of the things that happened with the First Crusade was it tremendously boosted the authority of the papacy. The papacy was very shaky before the Crusade, and the Crusade solidified the Pope's power and made him into the powerful person that he was. Here's a Crusader ship heading off to the Holy Land, and here is combat between the Crusaders and the Muslims. A lot of technology entered Europe because of the Crusades. A lot of changes happened. Here is an effigy of a Knight Templar. So the military orders like the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller were formed as a result of the Crusades. And what they were monks on horseback with armor on who fought. And this is a Knight Templar. Here is Richard I. I had the dates wrong for Richard I. I believe his dates are 1088 to 1099. He ruled 10 years. But he went on crusade, and he was captured and thrown into prison, and here he is pining away in prison, and supposedly it took a king's ransom to get him loosed. His vassals raised the money to buy his way out of prison. So that's one of the famous things about King Richard. We're going to come back to King Richard later on in the lectures. Here is St. Louis, who also was a famous king who went on crusade, and here he is kneeling and saying a prayer to God. So King St. Louis, also of France, also went on crusade. Here is a charter of the ancient hospital of St. John, founded by the Hospitallers, who were one of those groups of monks on horseback who were of the knightly orders. The Northern Crusades also include the conquest of the East. Here are the Teutonic Order of Knights, who were one of those military orders who conquered in the north of Germany. Here is the frontier, which was cleared on the east, the eastern frontier, and here are the Teutonic Knights who captured, who converted people by the pointing of the sword. And here is the east, again, the expansion of the east that you can see. Finally, the Kingdom of Spain was reconquered. And so one of the points I was making was that Europe was bursting its bounds. And Spain, the Battle of Toledo in 1085, meant that a lot of manuscripts were translated and sent back into Europe. And by 1492, even the lonely holdout Muslim kingdom of Granada was conquered. So this was a kind of crusade as well. The result of this was the pouring in of lots of learning into Europe. The papacy was strengthened, cultural contact and stimulation, Byzantine and Muslim artifacts and forms, artistic forms, poetry and music, musical instruments and technology entered Europe, weapons, warfare and strategies, manuscripts and lost works and ideas, stimulating existing trends and forces. So that briefly, we've looked very briefly at the Vikings, the Normans, and the Crusaders. Now we're going to turn to one of the cultural aspects of medieval Europe, the medieval drama. And this is a miracle play at Coventry, England. So let's now have Anthony Collins with the School of Theatre on medieval drama.
I'm Dr. Anthony Collins of the University of Houston School of Theatre, and I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts on this phenomenon we call the medieval drama. Now, in this class, The Flowering of the Middle Ages, you will hear about the troubadours who entertained at the court. In its origins, at least, this was a fairly exclusive and what we would call today upper-class type of entertainment. And although some of the songs the troubadours sung were religious in nature, pretty soon glorifying warriors and romancing the ladies became the favorite topics. On the other hand, the drama which we'll be talking about never really lost its religious connections, even when, particularly in England, some pretty outrageous farce elements crept into the productions. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, the official theater disappeared, and the thousands of players who had earned their livelihood appearing in these productions had to, as we say in show business, hit the road. Remnants of these troupes wandered through Mediterranean world, particularly all through the Dark Ages, even if it were only one or two players reciting bits of ill-remembered dialogue from a play and fleshing out their repertory with songs, dances, juggling, sword swallowing, and other sorts of vaudeville entertainments. And as the northern countries really had no strong theater tradition from Roman times, the vacuum there was even more complete. Of course, Western civilization did survive the Dark Ages. And as the first glimmerings of renewed life appeared, so did the drama. And when it did, it was in the monastic church, which, as you know, was the cultural center of life in the Middle Ages, in the early Middle Ages particularly. Now, as a factual aside, I should note that the only playwright of name from this period was a German nun, one Hroswitha, who lived in a convent in Gandersheim, Germany, and who wrote several plays on religious themes in imitation of Roman models, particularly Terence. But these plays of Hroswitha were literary exercises, probably never really intended for production, and were addressed to a fairly select and learned audience. The kind of drama I'm going to be talking about was much more popular and soon spread all over Europe. What prompted this rebirth of what's going to become this popular medieval drama here at the beginning of the Middle Ages? I think it was a marvelous example of what the biologists would call convergent evolution. in that both times in our Western culture that drama has appeared, it has emerged out of religious activity. The first time was when the Greeks devised tragedy out of their celebrations in honor of their god Dionysus. And the second time drama emerged in the Western world was in the Christian church, here in the period we're discussing, the early Middle Ages. Now, to say much about the medieval theater requires a lot of guesswork. The performance arts are very ephemeral. They leave behind no statues, buildings, paintings, tapestries. Even the crude musical notations of the medieval music give the modern musical historian more to work with than the theater historian has. And much has been lost. Of the some 125 guild productions done in England alone, during the High Middle Ages, only some 4 scripts remain. Most of the others were probably destroyed by Puritan fanatics during the 16th and 17th centuries. And even within the 4 scripts that are preserved, there's a lot of controversy concerning who did them, who wrote them, how they were staged, and so forth. There's not a single sketch or picture of a medieval guild production done out of doors that can be dated earlier than the mid-15th century. And there are precious few eyewitness accounts. Just the scripts and a few stage directions. I say all this so you'll be aware that what I'm going to share with you is based on the best guesses of an army of dedicated scholars, but there's a great deal about the medieval drama that we don't know. Well, given all these disclaimers, what can I say? Well, you must realize we're talking about a period that covered some 500, 600 years, and there were numerous changes in when and how these plays were done. Yet there remains that common thread, the religious subject matter that holds the whole thing together. So, as I said, we must go to the monastic churches in the early Middle Ages to see the beginnings of this rebirth of drama for the medieval period. It was Easter morning, and the most holy Mass of the year was about to be celebrated in the sanctuary. As you know, the choir was divided in halves, singing antiphonically to each other from their lofts flanking the altar. As their mastery of music had increased over the years, these singers had begun, certainly by the 9th century, a prolonging and elaboration of the final Alleluia of the introit or introduction to the Mass, showing off, we might call it today, and then they added some words, probably to make the singing easier. This interpolation into the existing text of the introit was called a trope. And one of these additions to the ritual text on Easter morning was a sung account of the visit of the Marys to the tomb of the Christ, based on the Gospels. It's called the Quem Quaeritus trope, from the opening words sung by the half the choir that's representing the words of the angel. In the text, the angel asks of the Marys as they approach the tomb, Quem Quaeritus, or whom seek ye? The full text is as follows. Angel, choir singing. Whom seek ye in the tomb, O Christians? The choir representing the 3 Marys sings, Jesus of Nazareth the crucified, O heavenly being. The angel choir replies, He is not here. He is risen as he foretold. Go and announce that he is risen from the tomb. Very simple, and in keeping with the event. Then it occurred to some theatrical genius in the 10th century that it would be effective to have some of the young monks pantomime the action of the biblical dialogue that the choirs were singing. So 3 novices pulled up their cowls to indicate that they were women and proceeded up the aisle during the singing of the trope. Another monk would step forward near the altar to represent the angel at the tomb. They'll soon give him wings, by the way. Now, let's back up just a step. Well before this Easter trope that I'm describing, the priests had already taken to enlivening the Passion Week celebrations by removing the altar cross on Maundy Thursday. The cross would be wrapped in linens to represent the body of the dead Christ. Then this would be placed in a crypt or lower space somewhere up near the altar to represent the tomb. So, when the Quem Quaeritus trope came to be enacted, quasi-dramatic elements were already a part of the church ritual and will be incorporated into the trope. Eventually, the choral singing by the 2 choirs will be replaced by individual chanting or singing done by the monks who are impersonating the 3 Marys and the angel. So widespread had the staging of the Quem Quiritus trope become that by 975 AD, Bishop Ethelwald Winchester found it necessary to write down specific instructions for his staging. He wrote in his Concordia Regularis, which was kind of an instruction book on how to run your monastery, these words on staging the Quem Quiritus trope. Quote, "When therefore the one seated," that's the angel, "shall see the three approach as if wandering and seeking something, he shall begin to sing in a sweet modulated voice, Quem Quiritus. With this is sung to its end, the three shall answer with one voice, Iesu Nazarenum. The former, the angel, shall respond, Non est hic, he is not here." Now what's astonishing to me is that Bishop Ethelwald is very specific on how this trope should be staged, concluding that, and I'm quoting again, "The angels should rise and raise the veil and show them the place empty of the cross, but with the linen in which the cross was wrapped. At this sight they shall set down their censers in that same sepulchre, and shall take up the linen, and hold it before the clergy, and, as if showing that the Lord had risen and was no longer wrapped in it, they shall sing this antiphon, Surrexit Dominus del sepulchro, and shall then place the linen on the altar." I submit that these are the words of a true theater critic and director. No sloppy improvisations here. Soon we have this Quem Quiritus trope developed into the play of the Three Marys, with the performers, who of course were still monks, now singing or intoning the dialogue, speaking or intoning the dialogue. And the whole drama business had become so intrusive on the Mass that it was moved to the matins or morning service where there was no Mass for it to encroach upon. Now very soon, a non-biblical scene was added, which did nothing but enhance the dramatic element. At the same time, it gave the people an everyday referent for the play. The Marys stopped at a spice merchant's on the way to the tomb to purchase the funeral unguents that they were going to anoint the body of Christ with. And they haggled over the price. What a wonderful touch. The spice merchant was stationed halfway up the nave of the church and placed on a raised chair. Perhaps he even stood on the chair at the beginning, with a bench or table in front of him to represent the counter of his shop. Soon this modest chair, called a sedes, was elaborated into what's going to be called a mansion, something like a miniature house. Now these churches, remember, did not have anchored pews seating as we do today, so the whole entire interior space could be cleared and the whole floor made available for mansions and dramatic action. And in the Nativity play, which soon was to follow the play of the Marys, it was necessary for the three wise men to stop at the palace of Herod. This, after all, is mentioned in the Bible, and so Herod had to have a mansion to represent his palace, placed halfway up the aisle, or nave. As you can see, they were small-scale representations of place. And although they were often richly decorated, they did not try to create a full scenic illusion in the way Italian Renaissance scenery will. They were symbolic and iconographic representations of a locale. As the plays increased in complexity, more mansions were needed, and the interior of the church was crowded with these scenic pieces. In larger churches, the mansions might be placed in the side chapels. Since the mansions were small, most of the acting had to be done on the floor of the church, and here the medieval mind developed the very sophisticated concept of the platea, or what I call the neutral acting area. Any part of the church floor could become any place the actors needed it to be for the purposes of the scene. Now, once the scene was over, the floor reverted to being church floor once again, although it could be someplace entirely different for the next scene. When the three wise men traveled the length of the aisle from the church door towards the manger, and incidentally, they were soon following an illuminated star, which was drawn on a wire strung the length of the church up just beneath the rafters. While, as I said, they were proceeding up the aisle, the floor immediately around them became the road to Bethlehem or Jerusalem, and the area behind them reverted to being church floor as they moved forward. When they stopped halfway up the aisle to answer King Herod's summons, the space around them, in front of Herod's mansion, became the courtroom of his palace in Jerusalem. After they left Herod and moved on towards Bethlehem, the manger near the altar, the floor became nave again, and the actor playing Herod shut up, sat down, and became effectively invisible. Why did all this wonderful invention occur at this time? Recall that the 10th and 11th century were golden ages of monastic life, epitomized by the founding of the great house at Cluny, France. Music, jeweled altarpieces, paintings, marvelous and handsome buildings, and now drama are developed as oral and visual aids to religious devotion. But didn't the churches get crowded as the plays grew in size? The mansions more numerous, the cast larger? What about seeing and sightlines? I'm convinced that the medieval mind approached seeing these plays in churches in the same way that you and I might seeing a parade. We'll be amongst a crowd of spectators. We aren't going to get to see everything, that's for sure. There's a lot of milling and shoving. We may even have our toes stepped on. Our feet get tired. But isn't it a wonderful thing to go see a parade? Now, by the 12th century, a major socio-economic shift has occurred, and the rapidly growing cities with their parish churches and cathedrals take the lead away from the monastic houses. And here we find the final step from the liturgical drama, which is what we term the plays done in Latin inside a church, primarily for a religious community, into the religious drama. Those enormous productions which involved everyone were acted out of doors and eventually were done in the vernacular. And we're fortunate to have the script of what we might call a transitional play in this movement from inside the church. The play of Adam was done in France near the end of the 12th century. And there are two very important things to note about it. The play of Adam was done either on the porch of the church or on a platform immediately in front of the church. In either case, the production is out of doors. And equally important, the dialogue of the play was done in French instead of Latin. The play of Adam, Le Jeu d'Adam, tells the familiar story of the temptation of Eve by the serpent, the eating of the apple by her and Adam, and their being cast out of Eden. And just as in the Quem Corridas trope, what I will call dramatic interest requires fleshing out the fairly skimpy Genesis account. So, Adam and Eve have a scene which can only be called a domestic spat. He tells her to stay away from the serpent. She replies that she doesn't see why she has to. He tells her that God made him the boss and she'd better avoid the serpent like he tells her to. Well, as soon as Adam storms off in a huff, the serpent appears and Eve listens to him. We have a script of the play of Adam with stage directions, but there are some questions about its staging. How was the serpent represented? How was the innocent nudity of the pre-lapsarian couple shown on stage? Two possibilities. Either Adam and Eve wore white leather bodysuits to simulate nakedness, or there was a shoulder-high curtain stretched around the platform to conceal their bodies until they had covered themselves in their shame with the proverbial fig leaves. The former answer, the bodysuit, sounds more reasonable to the modern mind, but we must be careful of projecting our theatrical prejudices 500 years into the past. I believe, for instance, that with the technology of the time, it was impossible for them to rig an angel flying in or Christ ascending into heaven without the rope showing, so to speak. This apparently did not bother the medieval spectator any more than the ponderous machine the Greeks used to lower in a god for a deus ex machina ending of a Euripides tragedy. These people had not been corrupted by Peter Pan flying on 19th and 20th century piano wires, not to mention the illusionism of Hollywood. They wanted to believe the illusion, and it worked. In these flourishing cities of the high Middle Ages, the dominant economic and political groups were the trade guilds, which had arisen to control production, set prices, ensure quality, and in general, pretty much manage the affairs of their urban world. And just about this time, the Catholic Church provided a wonderful opportunity for these guilds to flaunt their wealth, show their power, engage in some friendly competition, and at the same time display their piety as devoted sons of the Church. I'm referring to the establishment of the great feast of Corpus Christi, which is being universally celebrated throughout Europe by 1325. Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, revolved around the sacred elements of the Eucharist, the bread and wine representing the body and blood of the Savior. From the start, it was a processional feast. That is, the clergy would bless the elements and then with proper escort and display carry it through the streets of the city. This soon became the most popular feast in Christendom for several reasons. First, It was held some 7 weeks after Easter, which meant May or June and a guarantee of good weather. Secondly, being an out-of-door event meant that great numbers, indeed the whole population of the city, could participate, and participate they did. For thirdly, very soon, if not from the outset, the trade guilds joined in the devotional procession which wound its way through the streets. Now, at this point, we're not sure whether the trade guilds had already been producing plays and merely altered and adapted them and attached them to the Corpus Christi festival, or whether the instituting of the festival prompted the guilds to get into the play-producing business. The fact remains that very soon the whole subject matter of the Bible had been divided up amongst the trade guilds, and each guild was spending enormous amounts of time, money, and effort on producing its particular play. We now have laity, probably apprentices and journeymen of the guilds, as actors, and of course the dialogue is in the vernacular. Professional actors may have been jobbed in for challenging roles such as Herod, and other townspeople might have been cast, but in the early stages these were pretty much guild productions. Let us consider the scripts of the Corpus Christi or guild plays which survived from medieval England. The four extant scripts are from York, number 1, where the subject matter of the Old and New Testaments was divided into 48 plays, or as I often call them, playlets. Coventry, as it was labeled in town, divided the material into 42 segments. The Wakefield or Townley plays, as they're also known, used 32 plays to tell the Bible story, and Chester, the fourth, had 24 plays. Now, these variations in number show that the material could be divided in various ways to suit the number of guilds active in any town. Well, let's take a look at a brief scene from one of these plays to get some idea of what the medieval viewer witnessed. I've selected the Second Shepherd's Play from the Wakefield cycle. This is the second play concerning the shepherds and not a play about the second shepherd. This title indicates an evolution in script writing. The setting is a hillside where the three shepherds are guarding their flocks. Soon another man from the village enters, a none too trustworthy fellow who's going to steal one of their sheep. Now, I'm going to ask you to read this script, which has been provided to you, while I play some background music. This is so you'll be more familiar with the rather archaic language used and can better appreciate what's going on. You might wish to read a few of the lines aloud to get some idea of what our actors are facing. Now, we're going to have that scene presented by several performers from the University of Houston School of Theater. We're going to begin the scene in the slower, almost chanting style of delivery we think they used for these out-of-door performances in the 14th century. but our actors soon will glide into a more modern rhythm so as to not be too tedious.
Lords, but these weathers are cold, and I am ill-wrapped, nearly numb of hand, so long have I napped. My legs they fold, my fingers are chapped. It is not as I would, for I am all lapped in sorrow. But we poor shepherds that walk on the moor, in faith we are near at hand, out of the door. No wonder as it stands if we be poor, for the tilth of our lands are as fallow as a floor, as ye can. We are so lamed, overtaxed and blamed. We are made hand-tamed by these gentry men. They rob us of our rest, our lady then harry. These men that are tied fast, their plows must tarry. What men say is for the best, we find it contrary. Thus are farming men oppressed, in point to miscarry. Thus the lords hold us under, thus they bring us in blunder.
Lord, but these weathers are spiteful, and the winds are keen, and the frosts so hideous they water my een. No lie it be, now in dry, now in wet, now in snow, now in sleet, when my shoes freeze to my feet, it is not at all easy. But as far as I know, or yet as I go, we poor wed men suffer much, we do. We have sorrow then and then, it falls often so. Poor Capel, our hen, both to and fro she cackles. But begins she to rock, to groan or to cluck, woe is to him our cock, for he is then in shackles. But young men a-wooing, by God that you bought, beware of a wedding, and mind in your thought, had I known is a thing that serves you not. So much mourning has wedding home brought, and grief with many a sharp shower. For ye may catch in an hour what shall savor full sour as long as you live. For as ever read I scripture, I have her, I keep near, as sharp as a thistle, as rough as a briar. She is browed like a bristle with sour-looking cheer. Had she once wet her whistle, she could sing full clear her paternoster. She is as great as a whale. She has a gallon of gall. By him that died for us all, I would I had run till I lost her.
Such servants as I, that sweats and swinks, eats our bread dry, and that is ill, I thinks. But neatly, both our dame and our sire, when we have run in the mire, they can nip us of our hire and pay us full lately.
Yea, thou art a fool, lad, a-wooing to ride, with one with but less for spending by his side.
Peace, boy, and no more jangling I'll abide, or I shall make thee full sad, by heaven's king. Beside, where are our sheep? Thy japes we scorn.
Sir, this same day at morn I left them in the corn. When the bells rang lauds, they have pasture good. They cannot go wrong.
That is right, by the rood. These nights are long.
Lord, for thy name's seven, that made the moon and the stars on high. Thy will, Lord, leaves me dry and lacking, so that of my wits I am shy. Now, God, I would I were in heaven, for there no children cry so still.
Who is that pipe so poor?
Mac, come you hither, tell us tidings.
Is he come? Then let each one take heed to his things.
What? I be a yeoman, I tell thee, of the king. Sit by yourself same and a bunch of great lordings and such. Now,
Why make thee so quaint, Mac? You do wrong.
Mac, play ye the saint, for that do ye long?
I know the devil can deceive. Him hang. I shall make complaint and get ye many a way and a word when I tell my lord how ye do.
But Mac, is this true? Come, that southern tooth unscrew, and set it in a turd.
God, look, ye all three, methought. How do you do? Ye are fair company.
May we now recognize you?
Oh, blast your just dealing. When a man so lately goes, what will good men suppose? Ye have an ill name, one knows, for sheep stealing.
And I am true as steel, all men what? But a sickness I feel holds me full hot. My belly is out of sorts. I feel not well. It is out of state. Seldom lies the devil dead by the gate. Therefore, full sore am I and ill. If I stand stone still, I eat not a needle. This day, this year, and more.
How fares thy wife? That is true.
She lies lolling by the road, and by the fire too. And a house full of brew she drinks well too. Ill speed other things that she will shift to do. Eats as fast as she can. And each year that comes to man, she brings forth a brat, and some years too. Now, will ye see what I offer? To give all in my coffer, mass pence to proffer, next day should she die.
So weary with watching is none in this shire. I would sleep if it cost me a part of my hire. Keep the watch, you.
Nay, I will lie down, for I must sleep or die. But Mac, come hither. Between us you shall lie down.
But I will hinder your sleep and make you frown. No dread my heed. From my head to my toe, mouse taus commendo, puntio palato, Christ's cross me speed. Now were of time for a man that lacks what he would, to stalk privily, then into the fold, and nimbly to work, though not to be too bold. Lord, but they sleep hard, that may one hear. Though I was never shepherd, yet now I may shear. Though the flock be scared, yet shall I nip near. I must move hitherward to mend our cheer. A fat sheep, I dare say. A good fleece I dare lay. Repay when I may, but this will I borrow.
Well, if this weren't a taped presentation and I could ask you for your comments and reactions to what you've just seen, I hope that you would have noted the social commentary that the author, very likely a priest, had put into the mouths of the shepherds in their opening speeches. Essentially, they're complaining about how hard their life is out on the moors. Well, life was hard for lots of people in the Middle Ages, so this perhaps was a point of identification with the audience. More likely, the author is reminding the rich city dwellers that their comforts are based upon the efforts of poor, tired hands like these shepherds. And you probably noted the slams against the gentleman who sees the farm horses in the midst of harvest and thus harry the poor husbandman. Note, it is not so much the privilege that's objected to as the untimely exercise of it. Also, you might have noticed that we're not so much dealing with individual characters as a class of people. Workers, in this case shepherds. Although each has a name, Call, Gib, and Daw, the lines could easily be interchanged, and there's little sense of distinction between them in our brief scene other than that which was a result of the talents and the visual presence of our performers. Mac is the village thief. Every town had one, and they waste no time in searching him for stolen goods as soon as he appears. Now, we ended our excerpt where Mac has stolen a sheep. He takes it home for his wife to hide and returns to the sleeping shepherds. They awake, discover the loss, and take him back to his house looking for the sheep, where we have some wonderful foolishness involving Mac's wife, who pretends to have just given birth and tries to pass the lamb off as her newborn child. Well, they discover this, they beat Mac up, and then the shepherds return to their watch. A trumpet sounds, the angel appears, and announces to them the divine birth. The three of them make their way to the manger and adore the baby Jesus. Now, all of this was staged in a rather small area. The prevailing theory is that in England, at least, the various playlets and their scenery were carried on wagons called pageants. These richly painted and decorated scenic wagons had been drawn through the streets as a part of the Corpus Christi festival, and now they're serving their main function as the stage for the guild plays. These stopped at specified places in the town. Usually 5 or 6 viewing sites was adequate to serve the population. Now, formerly it was believed that each pageant was adequate for both scenery and action. But unless the actors merely stood and recited their lines, many historians argued there simply wasn't enough room on them. The more recent theory is that the pageant wagons, with the scenery and actors aboard, would pull up behind another wagon left permanently at the site. This was to give more room for the actors and the action of the piece. The second Shepherd's play, as I indicated, requires 3 localities: the Hill of the Shepherds, Mac's house, which must accommodate a bed for his wife, and the manger for the Holy Family. That's a great deal for a wagon that was perhaps 6 to 8 feet wide and 12 or 14 feet long. Of course, they used the mansion for settings. A dwarf frame and a bed could represent Mac's house, a manger with a suggestion of a roof for the stable. So we can imagine the first wagon with the Genesis account of the Garden of Eden coming into the town from some assembly point outside the gates. It would stop at the first viewing site, pull up behind the permanent playing wagon, do its play, perhaps 15 minutes long, 20 minutes long. Then the first wagon would go to playing site number 2 and repeat its play, while the second wagon entered the town, pulled up to the first site, and did perhaps the Cain and Abel story. Then, theoretically, both would shift. Genesis wagon to site 3, Cain and Abel to site 2, and the next pageant, perhaps the Noah story, would play the first site, and so on until the full play had been presented at all sites in turn. Well, you can imagine some of the problems, can't you? Not all the plays were the same length, so pageants would have to wait until the next site was clear. There was the time needed to move the wagons from site to site. An enormous number of wagons would be needed to mount the entire play. The whole production would take an enormous amount of time to do, an entire day at least. At some towns it took several days. Some historians have given up and argued that the plays were not done processionally in sequence, but rather the pageants were paraded through the town as part of the Corpus Christi procession. Then a number of them pulled up to a large fixed platform where the playlets were done in proper order for the entire assembly of townspeople. Then another set of pageants would pull up and do their scenes. The scholarly verdict is still out on this one. Now, if all this weren't enough, I now have to tell you that this pageant wagon method of staging was used primarily in England, the Netherlands, and Spain. In other parts of Europe, especially France and parts of Germany, another system prevailed for mounting the Corpus Christi plays. Rather than the trade guilds doing the plays, public-spirited citizens formed associations with the single purpose of producing a religious play. These were called confraternities. Often they were a cross-section of the town. Masters from the guilds, perhaps some clergy, some aristocrats, town officials, lawyers. All would unite for the specific task of raising the money and seeing to the production of the play. I'm reminded of the board of directors of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, usually business people and other leading citizens who give much of their time and effort for a civic cause, staging the rodeo and raising scholarship money. In the Middle Ages, this horizontal organization, particularly in France, crossing professional and some social lines, would be granted an exclusive right of production by the city council. The play would be cast from the townspeople. The most famous of these producing groups was in Paris. The Confrérie de la Passion, which in 1402 was given the exclusive right to do the religious drama within the city of Paris. Now, these continental confraternities did not use the pageant processional staging process. Perhaps it was too expensive, or lacking the involvement of all the trade guilds, it was not necessary for each guild to have its own wagon for publicity purposes. Anyway, these plays were handsomely done, presented out of doors on a large fixed stage before a sizable audience that was charged admission to cover the expenses of the production. One of the best known of these was the Valenciennes Passion play. In 1547, something like a commemorative program was done, a series of sketches and paintings recording the stage and scenes from the play. This precious historical record shows us how the mansions were arranged across the back of the stage. Now, this was a passion play which focused on the last few weeks of Christ's life, culminating in his crucifixion and resurrection. Thus, it was more limited in scope than the full Corpus Christi play, which covered the whole Bible. Now, in addition to the Corpus Christi or cycle plays and the Passion plays covering the last days of Christ, another popular form of medieval religious drama was found throughout Europe, and this was the miracle play, a work based on the life of some particular saint. Very often the play focused on the marvelous things the saint did during his or her life and ended with the almost inevitable martyrdom of that personage. These plays would be produced by associations on the confraternity line as acts of religious devotion. Sometimes a guild would do a saint's play. Special attention was given to the staging of the torture and death scenes in these plays. One of our few existing medieval records is a drawing of a miracle or saint's play, Saint Apollonia, done in France about 1460. Several things we might notice about this picture. It's being done in the round, and indeed there's evidence that in many locales this circular type staging was common. There was a brush and briar fence placed around the entire site to prevent people from entering without paying, and around the central playing area was a series of platforms elevated some 8 feet or so above ground level. Many of these elevated spaces serve as mansions, clearly visible as heaven to the left of the painting, with angels, and the center platform is clearly the throne room from whence the pagan king has descended to supervise the torturing of poor Apollonia. And there is a musician's gallery. But you also can see an elevated seating area, evidently reserved for ladies of high rank to judge from the headdresses they flaunt. Now, we also know that some of the morality plays, which I will speak about later, were also staged in the round. But to return to Apollonia, you might wonder how you could get any actor to undergo the tortures that a saint had to in these plays. Well, they didn't. All sorts of rather sophisticated stage trickery was used, with platforms with false bottoms and lifelike dummies, sometimes stuffed with animal entrails for that realistic touch to allow for convincing torture and death scenes. As a matter of fact, special effects were quite frequent on the medieval stage, including the Corpus Christi plays, a rainstorm for the Noah play, a beheading for the John the Baptist play, where his head bounces across the floor and springs of wine, milk, and water jet up from the places where it touched. But probably the favorite, we might say standard special effect of the medieval stage was the hellmouth. Evidently, medieval people loved seeing how terrible were the tortures awaiting the damned. Typically, the door to hell is rendered as the mouth of an enormous animal, usually dog-like in appearance. And out of it issue a horde of demons, appropriately dressed in scales and claws. Most actors in the medieval drama had to provide their own costume. The period had little sense of history. They usually dressed Pontius Pilate in Turkish robes with a turban and beard because that was how a contemporary ruler of the East dressed. But the devil's costumes were special-made items, and the producing group paid for them. As we proceed towards the Renaissance and the all-important Reformation, I need to make something clear. The medieval period loved traditional ways of doing things. So while new reforms were emerging, the traditional cycle and saints' plays were produced as they had been before. Now, this is not to deny change. By the late Middle Ages, the guilds had lost some of their exclusive powers and economic monopoly, and more of the funding and control of the plays was assumed by the various city corporations, or as we might say today, the city councils. But the religious drama continued and was very popular. But as the Renaissance ideas percolated through Northern Europe, a new and very important form of theater emerged, and this was the morality play. Now, the morality play was still firmly grounded in Catholic theology and ritual, but the argument was more sophisticated. The morality plays were more based on humanistic reason than on biblical revelation. They were more personal and less cosmic than had been the cycle plays. And the play revolved around the protagonist's active efforts to achieve salvation rather than around some heavenly destiny as recorded in the Bible. Sometime in the early 1400s, in England, a monk, one John Lydgate, translated a work from the French. It was called the Danse Macabre. No doubt the original of this had been composed in memory of the Black Death which had swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, and in its original form, the play probably was danced and sung. This Danse Macabre by Lydgate is pointing us towards the much richer characterizations and personal interests of an everyman, for instance, but the Lydgate piece is much more formulaic in its processional staging. Our same medieval players have prepared a brief segment of Lydgate's Danse Macabre for you to see. We will do it in a spoken version, and we offer only a few episodes because to the modern spectator, nothing happens in the play. Death merely goes to a series of stock types or representative types, the Pope, the Emperor, the King, the young squire, the child, the hermit, and tells them that they must die. And each in turn comments on how little their wealth or way of life, or lack of wealth for that matter, was able to avert from them this most universal of human experiences, death. Again, I offer you a few minutes to look over the script of the Danse Macabre to familiarize yourself with the vocabulary. And now we present scenes from the Danse Macabre.
O ye folks, hard-hearted as a stone, which to the world have all your advertence, like as it should ever lessen in one, where is your wit? Where is your providence? To see nofone the sudden violence of cruel death, that be so wise and sage, which slay at last by stroke or pestilence, both young and old, of low and high parage.
Ye that been set most high in dignity of all estates in earth spiritual, and like as Peter hath the sovereignty over the church and states temporal, upon this dance ye first begin shall, as most worthy Lord and Governor, for all the worship of your estate papal, and of lordship to God is the honor.
First me behooveth this dance for to lead, which fat in earth, highest in my sea, the state full perilous, whoso taketh heed to occupy Peter's dignity. But for all that dance I may not flee, on this dance with other for to trace, for which all honor who prudently can see is little worth that doth so soon pass.
O noble King, most worthy of renown, come forth anon for all your worthiness, that whilom had about you environ. Great royalty and passing high noblesse, but right anon all your great highness, sold from your men in haste ye shall it lead, who most abundeth here in great riches, shall bear with him but a sheet.
I have not learned heretofore to dance, no dance in sooth of footing so savage, wherethrough I see by clear demonstrance what pride is worth, of force, of high lineage. Death all, for doth this is his usage. Great and small that in this world sojourn, who is most meek, I hold him most sage, for we shall all to the dead ashes turn.
Come forth, master, that lookest up so high with instruments of astronomy, to take the degrees and height of every star. What may avail all your astrology? Sith of Adam, all the genealogy, made first of God to walk upon the ground, death with a rest, thus saith theology, and shall die for an apple round.
For all my craft, cunning or science, I could not find no provision. Neither in the stars search out no difference, by domifying or calculation, save finally in conclusion. For to describe our cunning every deal, there's no more by sentence of reason. Who liveth aright must needs die well.
Ye rich merchant, ye must look hitherward, that have passed have full many divers land, on horse and foot, having most regard to lucre and winning, as I understand. But now to dance, you must give me your hand, for all your labor full little availeth now, and vainglory both of free and band, none more covet than they that have enough.
By many a hill and many a strong vale I've traveled with many merchandise. Over the sea down carry many a bale to sundry isles more than I can devise. Mine heart inward I fretteth with covetise, but all for naught now death doth me constrain, for which I see by record of the wise, who embraceth little shall constrain.
Ye that have lived long in wilderness, and there continued long in abstinence, at that last yet ye must yet dress of my dance to have experience, for there against is no resistance. Take now leave of this hermitage, wherefore every man advert to this sentence, that this life here is no sure heritage.
To live in desert called solitary, may again death have respite, none for space. At unfet hour his coming doth not tarry, and for my part, welcome by God's grace, thanking him with humble cheer and face, of all his gifts and great abundance, finally affirming to this place, no man is rich that lacketh sufferance.
That is well said, and thus should every wight, thanking his God, and always dress to love and dread him with all his heart and might, since death to escape may be no likeness, as men deserve, God quitteth of right wiseness. To rich and poor upon every side, a better lesson there can no clerk express, than till tomorrow is no man sure to abide.
Ye folk that look upon this portraiture, beholding here all estates dance, see what ye have been, and what is your nature. Meat unto worms, not else in substance, and have this mirror eye in remembrance, how I lie here, whilom crowned king, to all estates a true resemblance, that worms' food is the fine for your living.
This play of the Danse Macabre may have been performed as a set piece, a formal presentation given before a notable visitor. And I've also noted that eventually the full-scale morality plays, such as Everyman with its allegorical figure, good deeds, riches, strength, the five wits, and fellowship, will evolve out of this. But the morality-type plays on much smaller scale soon became part of the repertory of a group that is once again becoming very visible as we approach the late Middle Ages. I'm referring to the professional acting troupes, or players as they were universally known. The players, that is, people who earned their livelihood by doing theater, for whom acting wasn't just an exciting part of being an apprentice in a trade guild, or seen as an act of devotion for an amateur who performed in a confraternity passion play on the continent. These players were those few people for whom acting was their means of livelihood, and with whom the medieval period had a love-hate relationship. The church still condemned them, a carryover from the Roman Empire days which designated players as infami. Yet we know that acting troupes were usually welcome to perform at monasteries, and there are records showing that bishops kept troops of players as part of their regal household. And imagine an actor officially condemned by the church might be jobbed in to play Herod or some other difficult role in a cycle play. Well, we see this inconsistency of attitudes towards players from the perspective of, once again, 500 years. Our present-day contradictions in our society are invisible to us, and a historian from the future may look back at us and ask, how could those people tolerate such inconsistencies? These actors, players as they called them, were a necessary evil, or should I say, an entertaining evil for the medieval world. And although they stood officially condemned, they were too useful to really banish. As they became increasingly visible in the late Middle Ages, these troupes would travel the length of the land, playing their repertory of farces, vaudeville-type skits and entertainments, and, yes, morality plays. Since these professional troupes often did their pieces between the courses of banquets in noble households, they eventually these plays came to be called interludes, literally the play between, and accurately reflect their place as incidental entertainments in the great hall of some lord. Along with historical, farcical, and religious types, the moral interludes soon became an important part of these players' repertory. Consider the advantages. Although the full-scale morality was often spectacular and could have a large cast and required the support of some producing group, the form itself, the morality play or interlude, could be and was adapted to a small troupe and a very modest style of production. In our Danse Macabre, we saw only a few of the numerous human types Death approaches in that work. And as in our presentation, hats, cloaks, and other symbols of life could effectively change the character in the eyes of the audience. Recall, we're dealing with a society in which a seal or badge of office, the kind of hat one wore, established who you were. Today, we have military and police uniforms, some clerical dress, but on the whole in 20th century America, you can't tell who you're dealing with until they tell you. Have you ever gone into a store and asked someone for help only to find out that they weren't a clerk? The Middle Ages avoided such confusions. The downside, as we saw in the Second Shepherd's Play, is that inconsequential or dishonest types such as Mac could appropriate a badge of office which allowed them to claim undue privilege over their fellow citizens, something like the way modern burglars often dress as policemen. So the morality was eminently stageable, and it was eminently respectable. Although not based on biblical or religious texts, the message was one of cautionary redemption. The church could readily endorse that. When a troupe came to a palace, it could do a moral interlude or two to establish it and its audience's respectability, and then fill out the program with the more raucous and obscene farces of the day, which were so very popular with everyone. And the same would apply when our troupe came into town and asked permission to perform at market time. The mayor, church dignitaries, and other leading citizens might well be given a preview of a morality to gain their favor and a license for the troupe to perform. And yes, maybe the dignitaries preferred the obscene farces, but decorum must be maintained, so the license would be granted on the basis of the morality play. All this has brought us to the late Middle Ages. We're already into a neoclassical theatrical renaissance in Italy. And these professional troupes and the morality form itself are important transitional stages leading to the secular drama and the flowering of secular theater, such as the Commedia dell'arte in Italy and the Elizabethan troupes in England during the 16th century. But the 16th century was a time of troubles, as well as a time of growth and expansion. And the religious explosion called the Reformation is eventually going to put an end to the medieval religious drama. In 1548, just 1 year after the great Valenciennes Passion play, the government of France banned all theatrical activity in Paris. And Elizabeth of England banned any plays on religious themes as soon as she came to the throne in 1558. In the late 16th century, the Lord Mayor of Chester, England, was called before this Elizabeth's Privy Council to explain why he and the aldermen of Chester had permitted the production of their famous but now forbidden cycle play. When a country is divided into Catholic and Protestant camps, it was bad policy to allow a production of a play which would only inflame religious feelings. The traditional plays were Catholic, and the Protestants wouldn't tolerate that. The Protestants tried rewriting old plays or writing new plays on the religious line, but they not only prompted the Catholics to get upset, they usually were very bad plays, largely devoted to showing that the Pope was the Antichrist. I urge you to remember the religious drama was not mere entertainment, and the culture of that time hadn't the slightest notion of what we would call religious tolerance. Well, maybe Henry IV did in France at the end of the 16th century, but eventually he was assassinated for his liberal thinking. Germany as a state didn't exist, and the German-speaking region divided on religious lines and set the stage for the dreadful 30 Years' War of the 17th century, where the Catholics and Protestants fought themselves to exhaustion and nearly to extinction. Only in Spain, which was a special case because of its location, its sense of recent redemption from the Moslem threat, and the presence of the Inquisition to ferret out and punish heresy before it could get a toehold. Only in Spain can we trace what I think is the natural evolution of a religious drama into a more humanistic and individualistic drama, which reached its glorious climax with Calderon in the 17th century. And modern readers are more often reminded of Shakespeare when they read Calderon than they are the play of Adam. There's a major point here I would underline. The great medieval religious drama did not die a natural death. It was killed off by governments because it was too popular in a time of religious upheaval. The secular Renaissance theater emerged to fill a vacuum. It did not push an old-fashioned competitor off the stage. You can dash through a medieval cycle playlet in 10 or 15 minutes, every man in less than an hour. And although Max Reinhardt did a famous production of Everyman early in this century, and a passion play was very popular in London a few years ago, for the most part we get the feeling, when we read medieval drama, of a world view that is more different from our own than that of Sophocles or Marcus Aurelius. But take a look at Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, which was written in the late 1580s. Faustus is a detailed and fully psychological character. We can see what Shakespeare learned from Marlowe here. And yes, Faustus represents the Renaissance spirit of striving and achievement, a theme Goethe will make the center of his version of the story. But Marlowe's play also has a good and a bad angel, and a faithful old man who represents genuine religious trust and piety. When Faustus asks Mephistopheles, "Where is hell?" and gets an intellectual dodge for an answer to the effect that I carry hell with me, the modern world is just around the corner. The medieval theater had always placed hell at one end of the stage, opposite heaven at the other end. And they did it laterally because to represent the true up and down orientation was impossible. So such a question, where is hell, would have been ludicrous 100 years earlier. And in fact, at the end of Dr. Faustus, he discovers where hell is as the trap opens and demons drag him screaming off to eternal damnation. And it is clearly put in the play, Faustus was not damned because he made a deal with the devil, but because he never was willing to turn to God with a contrite heart and ask forgiveness. The great socialist art historian Arnold Hauser characterizes the medieval drama as the most representative art form the medieval world produced. At the same time, it was the most inferior aesthetically. Medieval drama does not affect the modern mind in the way that a cathedral, a stained glass window, even medieval music can. It was not the aesthetic power, but the unifying concepts this drama expressed that made it so true a reflection of the people of that time. By the 15th century, that worldview was showing signs of strain, and by the 16th century, it was disintegrating. And Glenn Wickham, a non-socialist English historian, focuses on the wonderful cosmic view the medieval drama possessed. The human being and its soul is still the center of everything. Angels and demons contest for its salvation or condemnation. We are eternal creatures. God is interested in our individual actions. We possess the power through our free will of gaining heaven or hell, just there at either end of the stage. And although Shakespeare had to settle for ghosts and witches instead of angels and demons, his profound interest in human character and its activities is what makes his plays so exciting to us today. Well, we wouldn't care to live in the 13th or 14th century for a moment, but we can be nostalgic for an age in which each of us wasn't just a creature of reflex, our destiny determined by DNA codes or environmental conditioning. We were active participants in God's great creation. Well, Rousseau also knew that you couldn't go home again, that you can't recreate by an act of will a more innocent and simpler worldview. But one can look back and admire an age in which there was an explanation for everything, and a form of theater which brought those explanations to life before your eyes on stage. I hope I've helped you to understand the medieval drama a little better. Thank you.
By Tony Collins, really a tour de force with his students doing the acting. Were you struck by anything about the plays that you saw, or the direction that his discussion took? Any comments? Yes.
It seems we've talked about how with the advent of the monasteries and stuff, they were advocating celibacy, and the shepherds in the play were talking about, oh, how terrible it was to wed and run away from your wife and stuff like that and turn your face away. And it just seemed that we had talked about that before.
Yeah, that was quite interesting in the play. Anybody, I mean, the sort of contradiction, but you have the ordinary people's view in the play. I think that not the monk's view. Yeah. Any other comments? Yeah.
I thought there was sort of I guess, an interesting demonstration of the intellectual wit at the time when he was saying that the thief took the lamb, and then the mother the wife tried to give birth to the lamb and show it off as the child, and then later on they go to see the Christ child, which was also the Lamb of God, and so it's this sort of parallel thing that's going on within the play that I thought was kind of interesting.
That was interesting. Tony Collins seems to think of this as a very simple time. It's almost like people are simple-minded. They're not Shakespeare yet. They're not Marlowe yet. But there's a lot of sophistication in this play when you read the actual script, and just as you pointed out, the parallelism between the joke of the lamb, that the woman giving birth to the lamb, and then the actual birth that is turned into seriousness. It's again turning the world upside down. That's going on in this play, and there is sophistication in this play. One of the things about it as we read the script is that the rhyming scheme is very sophisticated and very difficult. The actors had a hard time with it, although they did a great job. One of the things that really struck me about the play was the fact that the frame of reference that Tony Collins took, he started by mentioning the Greeks, and he went all the way up to the 17th century, and you know, the assignment was do the Middle Ages, and it's very interesting how each lecture has a different kind of frame of reference for the lecture according to what the topic is, and so that with drama, his touchstone is Shakespeare, and it's like everything is leading up to Shakespeare, and the medieval drama is not a thing in itself, although he does discuss it as a thing in itself, but it's leading somewhere that flowers more in the Renaissance in his mind, I think. And each lecture is going to have that kind of a viewpoint that's quite different. That's what kind of struck me. Oh, touch your mic, Patricia. Yeah.
Is this right?
Yeah.
It's very interesting that he talks about the end of this play as coming to an end because of the Reformation, and the religious play was actually killed by the politicians who couldn't tolerate it.
Yeah, that was very interesting for someone especially like me. I kind of see the end of the medieval Renaissance as the Black Death. And for the theater, that's not the end. He sees it as sort of, this is what causes the danse macabre. This is what causes a new development in the theater. And whereas I talk about the Black Death in especially in this book as a watershed, as a kind of end of the medieval creativity. And so, you know, I could be convinced that I'm wrong there, maybe. So that's one of the things we're doing in this class, is maybe opening our eyes to new things. Okay, next week we're going to have a wonderful treat because John Snyder from the Moores School of Music has gathered together a lot of musicians who are going to do Gregorian chant, and they're also going to use replicas of real medieval instruments. So we're going to have a wonderful lecture next week. You can look forward to that. And we'll see you next week. And I'll also tell you about the second paper next week.